Hello, I want to greet you wherever you are watching us. Uh, this is Brian from Hopes and Dreams TV. Last time we covered the introduction of the character arc on the storytelling or screenplay writing, and I promise you that we'll look at the number of variations that are available to a character in the story. What forms can they take? And we looked at the stage Freddy. We looked at the griever, we looked at the weaver, at the wafra, and the exception maker, and lastly, we looked at the backslider. So today, we're going to look at these in detail. The Steady Freddy. Who is a Steady Freddy character? This kind of main character starts with a fixed belief about the central personal issue of the story. Act by act, scene by scene, he gathers more information that leads him to question those pre-held beliefs. Beliefs is owed on him to question his owed on the attitude gradually weakens until at the moment of truth. He simply steps over to the other side or not. This kind of character slowly changes until he's not committed to either his original or the alternative belief. It all comes down to which way the wind is blowing when he ultimately must choose one or the other. This is a steady Friday. So before he begins anything, he has before he begins anything, he has what we call pre-held beliefs. But as he goes, he begins to gather information, and this information tempers with his pre-held beliefs. So he has to choose one or the other. So depending on what he collects, when he must make a decision or when he must move to what we call the moment of truth, he either will step over to the other side or not. So his change comes as a result of the weakening beliefs, what he believes in. As he gathers information, then he begins to change. So as the beliefs weaken or the resolve weakens, it changes gradually. This is what they call the steady Freddy. Next, we look at the griever. Who is a griever? A griever main character is also confronted with during evidence that his original beliefs were in error. But unlike the steady Freddy, this character suffers a growing internal conflict that starts to tear him apart. The griever feels horror, honor bound, or morally obligated. The griever feels honor bound or morally obligated. You must mark that. This is what affects his journey. So, this feeling of honor bound or moral obligation to stick to his old loyalties, yet becomes more and more compelled to jump ship and adopt the new way opposition. So, in a way, the griever is different from the steady Freddy because to him, as he gathers information or as information changes, he has internal conflict. The conflict is for him to stay. Normally, he is bound morally or honor bound to the original held beliefs and he wants to hold on to them. So inside, it begins to suffer internal conflict, whether it must change or it must not change. This is what happens in a griever. At the end of the story, he must make a leap of faith, choosing either the old way or the new one. With such a balance created that there is not even a hint as to which way would ultimately be better. This is what we call a griever. The next one we look at is the weaver. The weaver main character starts out with one belief system, then shifts to adopt the alternative, then shifts back again and again and again, like a sine wave. He weaves back and forth every time he gathers new information. That indicates he is currently in error in his point of view. The intensity of these swings depends upon the magnitude of each bit of new information and the resoluteness of the character. This is a weaver. If we are talking about American politics, this is what they call flip-flop. He barely doesn't have a concrete held position. It shifts according to what has come. So he's almost blown about by the wind. It changes direction according to what is prevailing at the moment. This is a weaver. So you must understand when you are developing a character, what kind of character am I developing? Is it a flip-flopper, a weaver? Is it a griever? Is it a steady Freddy? These are the options that are available. So look at the last three. That is the waffler, the exception maker, and the backslider. The waffler. Unlike the weaver, the waffler jumps quickly from one point of view to the other, depending on the situation of the moment. He may be sincere, but overly pragmatic, or he may be opportunistic and not hold either view with any real conviction. This is a waffler. You must understand. You move quickly from one point of view to the other, depending on the situation of the moment. He may be sincere, but overly pragmatic, or he may be optimistic and not hold either view with any real conviction. Even in life, there are such people who can move anytime. They don't have concrete beliefs about something. They don't have a point of view that is so strong that it will hold them in that position. This is the waffler. The next we look at is the exception maker. Who is an exception maker? The character reaches the critical point of the story and decides that although he will retain his original beliefs, he will make an exception. In this case, this character will be changed character of the story if the story is about whether or not he will budge on the particular issue, especially since he has never made an exception before. But if the story is about whether he has permanently faltered his nature, then he would be seen as steadfast because we know he will never make an exception again. With the exception maker, you must be very careful to let the audience know against what standard it should be, what standard it should evaluate the church. So you must understand that the exception maker is a person that in the story, the character that in the story, you do not expect to change. But somehow, because of the events that leads to the moment of truth. You find that he must decide whether he must make an exception this time. Therefore, if he makes an exception this time, we'll know that it's just this time that he has made this exception. It doesn't mean that even next time we shall make the same exception, no. So the audience must know what to evaluate this change from. They should know his standard and they should know that this person is like this. This is exception maker. Lastly, we are looking at the backslider. Similar to the exception maker, the backslider changes at the critical moment, but then reverses himself and goes back to his old belief system. In such a story, the character must be said to change because it is the belief system itself that is being judged by the audience. Once the moment of truth is past and the results of picking the belief system are seen in the development at the end. In effect, the backslider changes within the confines of the story structure, but then reverts to his old nature after the structure in the closing storytelling. An example of this occurs in the James Bond film On Her Majesty's Secret Service. This is the only film where Bond changes, or 007 actually changes. There he has finally found love, which has filled the hole in his heart and previously drove him. So we see that James Bond or 007 was being driven by the hole that was in his heart. But once it is filled, then he resigns from the force or from the service and gets married. This is the end of the structure. Then we see that in addition to storytelling, his wife is killed by the villain and his August is restored. So good old James Bond can return just as he was in the next sequel. This is a backslider. We see a person that is held a certain position and we know he cannot change. But when an event happens in his life that completely transforms him, we see him changing, but then something again happens and he reverts back to the old self. So these variations, in conclusion, in each of these kinds of characters, the characters may be aware that he or she is flirting with change, or may not. They may simply arrive over this situation or just breeze through them, not considering how they might be changing in either case. Each of these characters may arrive at the leap of faith where they must make a conscious or conscious decision to do things the same way or a different way. Or each may arrive at a non-leap of faith story conclusion, where they never even realize they've been changed. They just are. The important thing is that the audience know if the main characters change or not. Otherwise, they cannot evaluate the results of the dramatic arguments. There are many ways to change or not to change. If you avoid getting stuck in a simply linear progression with a binary choice, your character will come across as much more human, and much more interesting. In conclusion, I want to give you a task: become a master storyteller. I want you to describe characters from a story you have written or are planning to write, whether they change or remain steadfast, and what aspect of their nature is changed or not. This is what you must have evaluate upon about the story that you have written or that you are supposed to write.